right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. First, I'm going to introduce an amazing panel in just a second, but before I do that, I was asked just to say a few words about why I'm here. And before I'll do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about my background. I'm Amy DeSalvatore. I'm a partner at a venture capital firm called Night Dragon. In addition to venture capital work, we also do advisory work. We're based in San Francisco. I'm also on the board of directors at the Cyber Guild and very passionate about the organization. I also am a strategic advisor for Next Gen Cyber Talent. I do strategic advisory for the Cybersecurity Forum Initiative. But before all of that, I had 2 decades or so in cybersecurity companies in strategic operator roles, mostly business development and strategic alliances and channel work. So partnerships pretty much my entire career. Before I dive into why I'm here, I do just want to thank Christy Grinnell because this is amazing. I mean, if any of you have been to a Cyber Guild or Uniting Women in Cyber event previously, this is just a whole nother level in terms of up-leveling our experience here. And thank you to AWS. So really appreciate what you've done for us, Christy, as far as upping our game. It's great. So why am I here? Why do I believe in the Cyber Guild, and why is Uniting Women Cyber important to me? And why am I in the board of directors? So if I think about that, and I had plenty of time to do that because it's a pretty long flight from San Francisco over to DC, it really boils down to 2 things: a mission that I'm deeply aligned with, and the people, and specifically the leaders who have built and live this organization every single day. The mission is both urgent and simple, and I think it's urgent because we all know that cybersecurity threats are escalating every day, and as you heard Chris Lovejoy and her panel talk about, our power panel, it's the geopolitical landscape has never been in this condition, and so we have a job to do, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us in the industry to kind of create a safe on-ramp for individuals to get into this industry, and once they're here, help them with education, mentorship, just like we do with our RISE program, but most importantly, create a sense of community and belonging so that when they get here, they stay and they lead, because that's how we start to build a sustaining organization and really help to drive meaningful momentum in the industry. Outside of the mission, when you think about the people, my first experience with the Cyber Guild, I was introduced to the organization through the founder, Mary Beth Borwing. And if any of you have met her, she is just a beautiful soul inside and out. And what really struck me with her was the way that she was able to kind of successfully transition from this high-paying, illustrious career that was really, when we're in our careers, a lot of that is ego-driven, and you're kind of wrapped up in the day-to-day busy work of what you're doing. But she had successfully started to transition her life and everything that she was doing to her passion projects and the things that really mattered. And in her world, that was about helping other people. And the reward that she was getting from that was obvious. And I, too, have wanted to kind of make that same transition, but it's very hard to do when you've worked your whole life and really putting more attention and time into the things that you think really matter and are more rewarding for you. And then Mary Beth introduced me to Debbie Salas. And for those of you that have met Debbie Salas, there is no one where it's more obvious that she has chosen purpose over comfort. She dedicates every bit of her time, every bit of energy to this organization. And so watching the way that they had sort of made that transition in their own lives deeply inspired me, and it made me realize that I didn't want to just admire it from the sidelines, the passion, the projects. I wanted to really get involved and help build and lead. And so that's what made me decide to get more involved. It also made me decide to get more involved with other projects in my life that I hadn't really been given enough attention, like working with animals. And so that's why I'm here today. And so And so my ask of everyone in the room, and this kind of dovetails nicely with what Debbie said in the beginning, is that while you're here, just make one offer to help. And through that offer to help, create an ally that you stay in touch with, because once you do that, it gives us the opportunity then to convert what's a singular event or activity like this to the meaningful momentum that we need as an industry and that we need as an organization to stay afloat. So with that spirit, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our awesome panel. So this session is titled Cybersecurity Strategy Meets Business Objectives, Cultivating a Security-First Culture. I was just backstage with our panelists, and It's incredible what some of these people have done and the boards that they currently serve on. So first, I'm introducing Niloo Razi. She's an investor, an executive, an entrepreneur who has served in the tech industry for 2 decades. She's served at former roles at Energy Impact, NYC, RSA Security, Endgame, and Paladin Capital. Today, she's the president of Stratum Group and an operating partner at Capital Meridian Partners. Oh, and she's also on the board of directors at Tenable and at Morgan Stanley. So I'm not sure how she has time to do anything outside of that. Next is Leslie Ireland. Leslie is the former Assistant Secretary of the Treasurer for Intelligence and Analysis. She joined the Treasury in 2010, and that was after 25 years in the CIA, where she specialized in Iran and the Middle East. She retired in 2016 after more than 31 years in the intelligence community, and she's currently a board member at Citibank and a board observer at Chubb Insurance. Dave Rankin is also on the panel today. Dave currently serves as the CISO at Verisign and the former CISO at Raytheon. He has over 30 years of experience in the field and is a proud U.S. Air Force veteran, founding member of the DoD's first Cyber Information Warfare Squadron, and he's also on the Cyber Guild Advisory Council. And then Georgianna Shea. Georgianna is a visionary leader in cybersecurity with nearly 30 years of pioneering experience across federal and commercial sectors. She's currently the chief technologist for the Transformative Cyber Innovation Lab at the Foundation for Defense Democracies and is the former chief engineer at MITRE. She's also on the boards of Cyberbeats, Radian and Rixon. And then the moderator. So Nancy Morgan is our moderator today. And Nancy is the CEO and owner of Ellis Morgan Enterprises and the former chief data officer for domestic engagement, information sharing, and data at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. She brings a unique blend of national security and executive leadership expertise, making her sort of an ideal moderator for this panel. And so today they're going to be discussing how to bridge the gap between cyber strategy, business objectives, and a guide to conversation on how leadership can effectively foster a security-first culture. So with that, please join me in welcoming Nancy and the panelists to the stage.
Good afternoon. So let's jump right to it. As we start our candid conversation, let's begin with a lightning round question. In 6 words or less, what is one cybersecurity trend that you are most excited or terrified about at present? Niloo, let's start with you.
AI-driven adversarial propaganda campaigns, that's 5.
Leslie, how about you?
What Niloo said. No. So AI, but quantum computing that may be coming faster than we think.
Georgianna?
I would say a starting trend that I'm seeing, resilience.
Dave?
It's really the hype around AI, both terrifying and exciting.
Okay. And I'm going to add one here, adversarial cooperation, keeping me up at night. All right, let's jump in. So Leslie, I'm going to start with you on this one. How do you link cybersecurity strategy and priorities to your overall organization's business strategy?
That's a really excellent question, and I think one that can often stump a board of directors. I think one of the most effective ways to do that is through a tabletop exercise. What you really need to do is instill a culture in your organization that cybersecurity is beyond the CISO or your information security officer. It is an enterprise-wide responsibility as well as a challenge. And the best way to drive that home is when you place a business in a position where they finally understand exactly what happens when, and I say when, not if, when there is a cyber incident, and they begin to understand the impact upon their businesses. Corollary to that would be for the board as well to take part in that tabletop exercise. and then to have an honest hot wash with management afterwards to find out what went well, what didn't go well, and what were the lessons learned.
Thank you, Leslie. And there's one thing you mentioned when we were doing our prep call. Are there other people you can learn from beyond the main sector you're in? So I think it was
Remind me
who
what you
else,
said.
depending on what's going on or what your board is dealing with, are there people outside of your sector you might want to engage with to help you navigate this?
Sure. So I think I'd answer that in two ways. One of which is if you're a board in a smaller company and you maybe don't have the resources to do a tabletop exercise, there are companies that can come in and help you with that, run you through that. The other thing I think in a tabletop exercise is there are interdependencies within sectors, financial sector, telecom, energy. And I think it's important that when you are going through an exercise like that, you understand how those other dependencies are going to act. And it's important that they understand, in turn, what are the critical functions in your organization and how they need to be prioritized when they're thinking about recovering from a cyber incident.
Can I underscore?
Sure. Niloo?
One thing that I used to do as an operator and as a board member I really ask for are both after-action reviews when there's an incident. And the after-action review should happen at the board level. It should also happen organizationally, and everyone should be involved with it. But the thing that we don't do often enough is near-miss exercises, right? So your sector's hit, you're not hit. But what if you had been hit with that particular campaign, or if that particular incident had happened to you? And that starts building a shared awareness for what the possible impact of cyber can be organization-wide as opposed to in a silo.
Thank you, Niloo. You're really talking about some of the continuous learning that needs to happen here in a broader range of considerations, and not just what you lived through, but thinking more broadly about it, sort of that inspect and adapt from Agile concept. Dave, same question here. How do you link cybersecurity strategy and priorities to your organization's overall business strategy?
I think what's very important is a combination of knowing your audience and explaining the why. We all talk about explaining the why as it relates to the technician and the person, the engineer that's having to do the configurations and whatnot. But that explaining the why should really be at the non-technical level. It should be in business speak. So when I'm forming a strategy with my team, what we do is we look at the business goals, we look at the business objectives, and we tie back to that, and then explain why it's important when I meet with the board. For example, when you look at the board members, they're likely going to be targeted in their personal lives as well as their lives being a member of the board. So it's important to have some type of threat briefing along with there, some type of exercise that you might do that really drives that home in a way that it impacts them as well as impacts the business itself. And then it's important to know that, who is in that board meeting? I don't myself work for the board of directors. I work for the CEO. Now, the CEO might also be in charge of the board of directors, but it's a little bit different. Some of those board members, and we have some here, are also boards on other companies as well. So they may have some questions that don't seem like they really align to you, but if you look at some of their background and what they're concerned with other areas of their lives, you can really start to establish that relationship, gain that credibility, and then think long-term whenever you're sharing your strategy as it relates to the cyber community. If I'm meeting with the board of directors in Q4 2025, in the back of my mind, I already know what I'm going to do in Q2 2026, and I'm putting that seed in there. First quarter 2026, I'm watering the seed, and then when we come to second quarter, here we're starting to bloom, and I'm highlighting an initiative or something that I want to accomplish, and I'm always looking back because I like repetition. It's like, we've talked about this in the past. I know you've come prepared and you've already looked into this. Those types of things that work with a lot of people when we're talking just general human behaviors also work with your board members.
Thank you. So we're going to kind of continue to build on this.
Can I make one more point?
Sure.
And I forgot this in our prep session. An analogy that I like to use is that Mario Andretti, I don't know if you're familiar with Mario Andretti, famous race car driver, said it's amazing how many race car drivers, including Formula One drivers, think that the brakes are on the car to slow the car down. They're not. They're there to help the car go faster. So what does that mean? That means that you can go faster on a straightaway because you've got the brakes to slow you down to take the curve and then come out of the curve and come on the straightaway. Cybersecurity is the same thing. Cyber is there, the cyber defenses, the cybersecurity measures that your CISO wants you to take are there to make your business go faster. They're there to help you to be more competitive, to make your information more reliable, more accessible. And so if you can help develop a culture in your organization that says cybersecurity is good, it's not the person that's always saying no. They're saying no because they want your car to go faster.
So it's really the theme about enabling here. So that feeds right into our next question. And Georgianna, I'm going to have you go first on this one, continuing this thread. When you talk about cybersecurity at the C-suite and board level, how do you frame the conversations? And part two, are your C-suite leaders receptive to your conversations?
I talk about it in terms of operational resilience. If you talk cyber to people, if you talk quantum to people, if you talk technology to people, they instantly tune out. So you have to speak their language, and they have to understand what you're saying. So when you say, if there's going to be some type of degraded incident that happens, a cyber attack, a tornado, a pandemic, whatever it is, are we prepared to do that? Do we understand what the mission is? Do we understand what the minimal viable service or product is that we have to be able to do and sustain during that degraded state? And do we have the systems and the processes and the technologies aligned to ensure that? When you speak their language, they are very receptive to that. I actually equate it more to an engineering process. If you can look at that critical path for how you then accomplish what it is you're doing, the mission, and you understand what that minimal viable service or product is that you have to do, then you can start to understand what are the key elements in the system, what are the key functions, what are the key technologies, what are the key processes, do you have the protections in place to ensure that they are going to be able to sustain in your priority processes, because if something does happen, you don't always have to bring everything back up online or do everything all at once, but if you understand who your customers are, the priority customers, again, what the minimal you have to do is in a degraded state, and then who you're depending on, and if you can't get those services or products in the supply chain or your partnerships, what does that look like for you, and then how do you ensure you have the redundancy built in, the security built in, and that you will be able to get through that tough time. So if you couch cybersecurity as another incident, again, tornado, pandemic, something, how do you ensure resilience? So I think that's very important to talk about the
Thank you, and I think your frontline people really appreciate you talk about prioritizing what has to come back online and making it more manageable for everybody. Right. So Niloo, same question. When you're talking about this, how are you framing the conversations, and what do you do to help ensure that leaders are receptive to the conversations?
So any given organization basically has 3 lines of defense. You have the CISO, you have audit, and you have the board. And those 3 groups need to be interacting with each other directly. When you have an intermediary in there, so if the CISO is not presenting, but and it doesn't report directly to the CEO, and someone else is, the CIO is, the chief risk officer, the general counsel, the conversation tends to be very different than if the CISO is actually speaking with the board. And what I would say is I've never had an experience with a CISO who didn't want to share everything with us. What I have experienced with is a whole lot of other executives who don't want the CISO to share everything with us. And that openness and building trust between the executive team and the board is critical. And some of the things I talked about, having after action reviews. So an incident happens, embrace it, let's talk about it, let's talk about lessons learned, over disclose, having near miss exercises, to have the humility to know by grace of God your organization didn't get hit with this thing. It's not because you're necessarily technically superior, but because you weren't targeted for that particular incident. Those kinds of things help build trust between these layers of defense. So having that open conversation, and it's very different depending on the type of organization you're in. So if you're in a regulated entity, so if you serve on the board of any regulated entity, you have responsibilities to the regulators, which sometimes turns the role into a compliance function. And there's, regulation is not actually always great from a security perspective because it turns security into a check-the-box exercise. And at the end of the day, you can go through every compliance checklist, have tons of remediation stuff you're doing for the regulators without improving your security posture one bit. So as we reset that a little bit, I actually think that's a very positive thing that we're doing going through a reset. But having those very frank conversations, building trust between those 3 layers of defense that any organization has is critical, and always tying it back to business goals, right? So as a cyber person, you can't speak your own language that nobody else understands, and the reality is, like, no one on the board cares really how something happened. They only care what the business impact of that thing could be or is. So understanding that language becomes really important. And the last thing I would say is, we're not there yet, but the criticality is not having cyber be its own function. Everyone has to own security. So what's the authority that your CISO has? Are they sitting in product management meetings and engineering meetings? Do they have the ability to stop something because it is not meeting security goals? And we have this problem if you think about large military systems, for example. What folks in the Pentagon are rewarded for is on time, on budget, right? Security isn't really part of that mix yet. So until everyone is incented to make sure that the security goals of the enterprise in everything you do, from your architecture to your products to customer data, is part of how everyone gets compensated, gets rewarded, whatever that structure is, then it's kind of its own silo. So that's a...
Thank you. So pulling this thread a little bit further, Leslie, I'm going to move to you, sort of the same thing. From your optic, who else needs to be at the table when you're thinking about cybersecurity matters on the way to the board, at the board, after the board?
Sure. So I think the first thing I would say, and I just want to pick up on some of what Niloo has said about the presentation, I think it's incumbent upon the board to help the briefer understand exactly what they need to know. When I was in the government, and you heard I spent a career in the intelligence community, our job was to convey information to policymakers. If you were going to be successful, you needed to understand that there was an intel so what and there was a policy so what. And you were successful when you were able to understand that policy so what and shift your analysis, not change it, but shift the focus of it. So I think it's really important that there is a dialogue between the board and the CISO or whoever is briefing you to make sure that it's understood exactly what the board wants to hear. But the reality is cyber touches every aspect of what your organization does. And again, that becomes completely clear when you're doing a tabletop exercise. You need your lawyers in the room, very definitely. Particularly in the event of a breach, because there are going to be certain reporting requirements, and you talk about rightly about a regulated industry, but in the financial sector, for example, the SEC may have one requirement, the OCC or the Fed may have another requirement, New York State may have another requirement, and so if you're a global organization, you're going to have requirements overseas, and so you really need your lawyer in the room. You need your public affairs people in the room, because there will have to be some kind of a public statement made. It's going to get out there what's happening, and you have to also be very careful what you say publicly, because things that you say publicly could potentially negate your cybersecurity insurance policies if you have them. You want to have your government relations people in the room. I'm just saying, is you really need, it takes a village. You need to think about everybody that could possibly be touched by this kind of a situation and bring them into the room. Again, I just want to stress, if you're in an organization that's a startup, is new, is smaller, who doesn't have all those resources, there are companies out there that can come in and help you do this kind of work, think about it, identify, and set up that kind of a system for you.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of the experiential learning, whether that's a tabletop exercise, a workshop, simulating something, and whether you tell people. I was involved in an interesting exercise with a nonprofit organization, and they didn't tell them that it was an exercise or a tabletop. And it actually went pretty far to the point of them notifying the police, so then people had to intervene. The CIO and the CEO knew, the CEO did not know. The CIO knew this was going to happen, but it was an example. And because of that, it helped educate on your partner ecosystem. So the one thing we didn't really touch on is we talked about everyone in your organization.
Okay.
But one of mine is you've got to go further. Who's in your partner ecosystem, those third-party providers? Because you have liability, they may have liability, and in this world of more advanced technology, the landscape's getting more complicated.
And thank you for nudging on that, because in fact, there are resources in the US government to help you, whether it's the FBI or DHS, or you know, if you're part of the Defense Industrial Base, the National Security Agency has resources that they can provide for you. And something that's very important, if you're on the board, is understanding how is the CISO and their team prepared in the event of a breach? How are they prepared to interact with law enforcement, with regulators, with reaching out for those kinds of resources? Another area to look at are information ISACs. Isn't it terrible how quickly I forget that? Major portions of our critical infrastructure have what's called an ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Yep. Someone check me on that?
ISAC's a nice house, yeah.
Thank you. So for example, that's an automatic way to share information on cybersecurity, cyber events, and that would be another avenue to look into.
Can I double click on this? The third-party risk is a really sort of hairy mess, is how I'd call it, because it's very hard to unravel. And there's two different aspects to it. One is, who is actually your third-party vendor, your third, fourth, fifth party, and where does their stuff come from? And for everyone here, I'm sure you've talked about Scattered Spider today. Yes, you guys all know Scattered Spider.
Not enough hands went up. You might give them the 20-second version.
Would you like to talk about Scattered Spider?
Really, what we're looking at is advanced persistent threats. So we have anywhere from China, nation-state actors that were going through and trying to get to different telecom providers, so get within all those critical infrastructure areas. Scattered Spider itself, digging in a little bit further, there's the pieces we're trying to get into the software supply chain, get some of the changes up in advance. So whenever you're absorbing something, getting information, getting software, whatever it might be, it's from a trusted source. So instead of going after you or your company directly, there are trusted sources that our adversaries could go after and kind of hit all of us at once for some of those bigger
and in a scary way, there's also, it becomes human risk, because what ended up happening is you had all these IT workers who were posing or stealing credentials as whether it was American or UK IT workers, but it turned out to be a Korean campaign to get into different organizations. A lot of it was financial, some of it was espionage, but it was kind of scary how many fake IT workers were getting hired by organizations across the world. So this third-party risk is both, are your vendors secure, and what security risk are they bringing into your network, and how do you validate, what kind of security risk they're bringing, because it was very hard to do. But then there's another piece of it, which is who is actually your vendor, who is your workforce. And one of the things that this whole IT worker fraud brought to the surface is that identity is actually the new control plane. And it is how so many of the biggest breaches happen. And having a trusted identity program in a company is critical if you want to stay safe and secure.
And frankly, the North Korean campaign isn't done, and they're expanding to other sectors now. And
Correct.
So I think that's the thing that, we're not all fully on top of this in the ways that we need to be.
Yeah, the AI portion of that too is very inexpensive. It's very easy when you have that VTC and you're interviewing someone to bring into the company to have it completely be someone else, as we were just saying, to the point where you might want to consider flying the person in if they're not local and having that physical meeting, because that's a lot harder for one person to have 17 different jobs that they're trying to get to and farm them out back to North Korea, both for the revenue, the information stealing, but then the access piece to me is still the most important, that having that persistent access within your infrastructure.
And
I just want to jump in on this real
Yes.
quick and point out that this is one of those emerging areas that people have not been prepared for. I know that sounds obvious, but you might look at your security system and your security controls and you say, we have access management, we have authentication, we do MFA, but I'm looking and seeing there's issues with the assumed authentication. I hear you and I see you, and that hasn't been an issue that's been dealt with before, where I'm looking on the video, I see my boss, it looks just like her or him, they called me up, it sounds just like him or her, so I'm gonna do what they say. That type of authentication has always been assumed based on the human factors that we can no longer rely on. So I think if your organization is under the impression that we're good, no, because the threat landscape is changing, and you've got to be able to account for those new type of attacks.
And it's not a once and done. This is an ongoing. The threat vectors are changing, the strategies are changing. Countries we thought that were maybe not as strong at this, things like the North Korean campaign, they're getting stronger. And democratizing access to technology, someone in their basement with not a lot of capacity can do a lot of harm. So Georgianna, let's continue this thought. What are some of the strategies you recommend to cultivate that security-first mindset and culture across the entire organization?
I will admit I don't like the word security or cybersecurity, and this has been my field for 30 years now. I like resilience, and I try to shy away from cybersecurity, because when you look at everything that deals with cybersecurity, it's the protect, detect. Okay, we've been compromised now. Oh, we're here, we found it. So you're going to be compromised. I think Leslie mentioned, yes, it's when it happens. You're going to be compromised, so how do you get through that compromise? How do you remain resilient? And then even in the, I guess just the protect pieces, there's other aspects of the resiliency that you have to understand, again, like choke points or lack of redundancy. Those aren't necessarily protections that you put in place, but it's an overall strategy for the resilience. So one of the tools I'm a big advocate of, and I'm maybe a little biased, I got to work on it. There's an operational resilience framework, the ORF, under the, and this is a bunch of acronyms, the GRF, the Global Resilience Federation, who has a BRC, the Business Resilience Council, which is a cross-sector group of professionals that discuss how do you ensure resilience. And so they've put together this ORF, the Operational Resilience Framework, that identifies what I was talking about in the first question that you gave me, the how do you ensure operational resilience, and identifying that minimal viable service or product, and really knowing that critical path to operations and how you prioritize that. So they've laid out a framework that goes beyond your business continuity plan. Because if you look at your typical business continuity plan, you're looking in-house. How do I do things? What do I do in-house? You're not looking at your external partners, external stakeholders, your external dependencies. So you're not understanding that when a war happens in Ukraine, your supply is now cut off with whatever that product is. Or when a pandemic happens, you're not getting those supplies from those mom and pop shops anymore. Do you have a backup? Can you sustain that? And then, on the other side, who are your customers, and what do you absolutely have to provide to them in that minimal degraded state that you're trying to go through and provide? So I would definitely point to the GRF as a community, the BRC as a cross-industry community that's looking at resilience specific, and then the framework that they have put together, the ORF, because again, it's much larger than just your typical business continuity where you're only looking in your house, not outside, and understanding all the dependencies.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the audience for a show of hands on something, and then over to Dave for the same question. How many of you are part of a critical infrastructure sector? Okay, a modest show of hands. How many of you are adjacent to or dependent on something in the critical infrastructure sector to operate?
Every hand.
Looking
I
for
should have
all.
seen every hand go up. That was a bit of a trick question. I didn't. So if not, that's something we should all talk about afterwards. And that's the thing that I think in some other sectors I'm seeing is a little bit of a lack of awareness of how dependent are their business processes to function on someone else being able to function. It is a more connected ecosystem than ever. So it is not just looking within your organization, but looking further around what else are you dependent on. So Dave, back to the same question. The security first mindset and culture, how do you cultivate that in your organization?
There's a number of ways. I had mentioned explaining the why earlier. That helps when we're dealing with the board and explaining and trying to get in that business speak. But at the same time, we have to be able to do that with our engineers. We have to do it with our marketing department, with HR, especially finance, all of those different people. So how do you communicate that piece together? There are a lot of different ways you could do it. My favorite tool is repetition. I see myself also as, I'm kind of in marketing. So our strategy, if we look at an information security strategy, when we set it up, it's not written in technical speak. It's written at very high level. What are those things that we want to do at a business level so that people can understand it, we can talk about it. I then use branding as well. So if we have a program, something I learned when I was at Raytheon Secure, we have Verisign Secure, where we are now. I'm not very creative with names. I just reuse them over and over. But it's how can I get the non-technical person to start speaking, understand, hey, if that system was breached, then did you have Verisign Secure on it? They don't need to know what that means. It's the words themselves, though, that I've already briefed them and told them this is the package we get. This is how we try to assume that we have a breach and that we're able to contain it and keep it to one area and not spread. Then there's another program you could use. We tried something called security ambassadors. We have some of our security ambassadors here now. But essentially what I've done is I have done a dotted line throughout the entire company. So I have 25 additional people, at least in some ways, reporting to my organization to share communication. We have different monthly and quarterly activities where we're sharing information. We're saying, hey, this is how security applies to you. This is what you should be thinking of, and then pull that information back as well. It's a two-way street for that. And I think the final thing on my marketing side is that I kind of think of every employee as a NASCAR, the vehicle that's actually raced around the track. So once a year, I'm buying them something that they could either wear or they can carry that reminds them every time they see it, it's security. And then I'm not bashful about it. This time of year when we're having National Cybersecurity Awareness Month and we're doing all our activities, every time I'm up there, I'm claiming I am trying to brand you just like a car. So that's my goal, so everybody knows to remember about security. And those little things helps them remember even more when they see the thing that we're doing and help set up that relationship that I think others have said in the past, that it's not just the InfoSec group. My team can't secure the company. We rely upon everyone else to help us secure the company.
Leslie, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I did, and I do, because I didn't raise this in our discussion beforehand, but something that's, I don't think it's peculiar to the financial sector, but they do a lot of risk assessments, and they have a lot of risk appetite statements for different functions within the bank. And they have a cybersecurity risk appetite statement. And I think it's an important way to first identify what are the systems, the programs, the elements that you absolutely positively have to have in order for your organization or your company to function. And then to define your level of comfort with risk in those different areas. It gives you something to measure. It gives you something for the board, frankly, to review and to understand whether you are in appetite or you're out of appetite. Being out of appetite, being out of appetite is actually a very normal place to be. That's not a black mark, but it tells your information security team, it tells your board that there are steps you need to take to get back into appetite. And that would be another way to be, because that risk appetite statement has to be created with the entire company, with the business lines, with the information security people, with everybody has to be on board for that.
So Niloo, sort of same vein in terms of how you think of cybersecurity fitting into the broader risk management posture of the organization, and how do you communicate it in the way that drives action?
Yeah, you can't separate cyber and risk anymore. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of risks. Or financial organization, you have financial risk, credit, they have all these risks. But anything that touches technology basically becomes cyber risk. One thing I was able to do in an organization where I controlled strategy, operations, and planning, and then I owned the security function because we had a major security breach that was international news. And so I took over the function with the goal of eventually graduating it out. But we embedded our security team into every process and function across the company. And because I was able to control planning, it meant I controlled resources. So if I wasn't happy with what I was hearing back from the security team, the resources weren't going to the folks who weren't taking security seriously. And so at the end of the day, it's a top-down culture. Either you have literally a secure by design in everything you do, which is where we need to go. I mean, what we're seeing right now is the way nation states are targeting our companies is scary, and it's persistent, and it goes beyond IP theft, which was terrible because of what it cost. They're now prepping the battlefield, right? So they are preparing to be able to disrupt and destroy our systems. So in this atmosphere, it can't be a silo. It literally has to be a core part of every function that exists in an organization, is an understanding that those interdependencies can have real consequences. So to me, there's really no other way of doing it. Culture always is top-down. As much as we would love for it to be bottom-up, it's just not bottom-up. So you need to have a CEO and an executive team that believes in a secure by design culture and that creates accountability throughout the organization around that culture. And I just don't think we have a lot of time to waste with thinking about, well, should I be taking it seriously or should I not be taking it seriously? I mean, we had the rash of whether it was scattered spider, all the typhoons that have hit us. We now, in our critical infrastructure, which everybody in this room is dependent on, we have our adversaries in there. We have them in our communication system, we have them in our energy systems, we have them in our financial systems. So we just need to have a different approach and a real approach to this.
And I think it's got to cascade down, or the risk of cascading risks and combined threats and things.
Could I
I'm
make-
going to pivot us.
Sorry, one
Leslie
other
a chance,
point.
and then we've got some audience questions. But
Sure.
Leslie.
So, number one, I learned from everybody sitting around me, so I appreciate being up on this panel today. But one of the things I wanted to add is I think we need to expand. You know, you mentioned IP, and I agree with that. Resiliency, absolutely critical. But I think we need to expand our view of what information that's been exposed and that is still important. And the example I'm giving is I was aware of a breach that the response was, well, it was just a bunch of the CEO's emails. It didn't include login credentials. It didn't include any, confidential information. And my reaction was, my gosh, it included the CEO's voice. The voice, in other words, it included how the CEO spoke. And so, in an email, so if you want to take AI, if you want to create an email where the CEO is being represented as instructing someone in the bank or in your organization to take some action, well, you've just given that to them. And my concern was it was the third party who came and said, don't worry, there really wasn't anything that was exposed. It was just the CEO's emails. No, that is of significance. You need to know about that right away. And I think that's where the playing field is changing considerably, that the information that we used to think, well, we really have to worry about password and login and, PII and all of that. You have to worry about everything now.
A much longer list.
Yes.
All right, a couple questions from our audience. So Georgianna, I'll start with you because this ties back to resilience. Going back to the earlier idea of what resilience, or preemptive rather than just responsive, do you have any top metrics for this?
Oh, top metrics for it. I would look at for errors in various, for resilience metrics, kind of depends on the systems. So instantly thinking about operational technology systems and the cascading effects, and then what touches what the interdependencies are. So you can look at the blast radius of things, a metric being how many systems out things are connected to each other. So if something does happen to a particular system, what's the residual effect? What's the down the road? What's the cascading event there? I think that's a fantastic metric. Another metric, talking about resistance or resilience, usually people will jump in and do some type of penetration testing, what's the effect? But when we talk resilience, I'm like, well, just take the pen testers out of it and unplug the network. You don't have to have an advanced team to come in and just unplug the network. How are you going to continue business? Take a key function within the system, disconnect that. So you can just start disconnecting things. I think there's a chaos monkey engineering. To just go through and start tearing things up and see how do you respond and ensure that you can continue business as usual. So you can incorporate metrics that way, but specifically what metrics, what area, that would be my question back to the question, but those were my first initial thoughts.
Thank you. Any of the others want to comment on that one, or?
I could add, when you're looking at different metrics as it relates to resiliency, part of it really does matter where you are. There'll be some overlaps with different companies and others will be unique. One of my former employers, one of the metrics we would focus on there is confidentiality. It was very sensitive information. It was national secrets. We want to keep that from the bad folks. Other employers, like right now, we just, Verisign over the summer celebrated 28 years of 100% availability of .com. So having that is a whole availability thing. As in DNS, we're going to give away our information for free, but it can't go down. And then you have some metrics that hit on both different organizations, although fundamentally very different. Mean time to respond, the time that the hackers are in the networks, or dwell time. How long has a hacker been in the network? Because I always say you're going to be breached eventually. It's how do you respond to that? How fast do you go? And with AI now, one of the things that I'm emphasizing with my board members is we always need to go faster. We're always looking, where can we automate? How can we go faster? How can I get the support that I need immediately so that we can turn something around quickly and contain what we're doing, because that relates directly back to our overall mission of making sure that we stay available.
Thank you. All right, our next question, and I'll let you guys decide who wants to answer first. The C-suite owns security, often under-prioritized as a non-functional objective. How do we manage being deeply invested in security work with the fact that the decision-making is not always in our hands?
I want to jump in on this because, again, this might be counterintuitive for a lot of people when they talk to me. Cybersecurity is there as a feature within the company, but you have to understand what the mission is. So if the risk appetite is we're okay with certain things, then you're okay with certain things. And I find cyber people to be very, make sure everything's super secure. And everything has to be absolutely super secure to the point where the mission can't actually take place. So I was joking earlier with Hart, who was on the stage, I think one of the first panels, that as a security professional, I'm not doing my job if you can do your job, which isn't really the case. You really don't want that type of situation where you're impeding the operations or the mission. So there has to be an understanding of what's good enough. And the example I usually give people in that scenario, especially cyber folks, because again, you want to make sure everything's completely secure, but you can't over-secure things. I used to work at the Pentagon, working science and technology issues. I was there during the first understandings of IEDs, your improvised explosive devices. So I'd come into work every day and we would look at how many soldiers were killed. And then we're looking at, okay, how can we go through and how can we stop this? What kind of technology or capability can we field where we're going to go through and identify where these IEDs are? So if you're telling me that we have built this capability, but it's not super cyber secure, so we can't field it, I would have a big problem with that. I think a lot of people would. So you have to understand what's the mission and then what's good enough. So I would say no cybersecurity on that. What's the worst thing that could happen? It's not going to detect an IED. Well, we're not detecting them right now. Best case scenario, we field the technology and it saves lives.
Can I may add something that's a little bit controversial here. So the cyber risk appetite that you mentioned is actually a board function. The board owns what the risk appetite for cyber needs to be. And then the management's job is to show that they are meeting that risk appetite, and you're meeting regularly enough to be able to validate that the executive team is actually performing to the risk bar that you're setting. So if there's an organization out there where the board has set a particular risk appetite and the management isn't taking it seriously, the board should be taking action, is all I have to say. Because at the end of the day, the board has the obligation, it has a fiduciary obligation to all the shareholders around this. So there shouldn't be this ability to hide, for the executive team to hide. I mean, the reality may be a little bit more complicated if you don't have a board that understands cyber risk appetite. And I think the point I was making before is we're at a place now where that should no longer be the case, because the risk is way too high across the board, and not every company is going to have the same cyber risk appetite. Financial services have very low risk appetite for a lot of reasons, including the fact that you make a mistake, you get fined $100 million. It has a real consequence. You know, mom and pop may have a slightly different cyber risk appetite, especially if they've backed up all their data, and it doesn't really matter. But it should be owned at the board level, and there should be accountability if the team isn't meeting it.
And I think, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to agree with that, and quickly then, when I look at the flip side of that, and risk is owned at the board level, I'm trying as a CISO to influence what the board member thinks about that risk, either through education and awareness, or if I think something should be different than what the board thinks, how do I influence that board to get to the same space? And at times, part of that is just if the board's here, I know, okay, this isn't my fight to have. I think that's, that's what they've said as what's acceptable. It's my job to implement that, make sure we execute on it, and then pick and choose those areas where I might want to try to have a little bit more influence on what the risk.
We need to make sure you're resourced, right?
Right.
So if we're not going to
Absolutely.
make sure the resources are there for you to do it, we need to know that and know, okay, are we going to adjust the risk appetite, or are we going to adjust the resource allocation?
But I think we talked about in the room while we were getting set up here and getting mic'd up, we're seeing more board level agenda items related to cyber. We're seeing more boards have cyber people as part of their composition. This is a pretty fundamental change over, say, 2 years ago. I don't think you saw the same level of attention to it. And it is partly because bad headline news is hitting more people in a more intensive way. It's only getting to be a more complicated landscape. The panel that was right before us talking about AI and quantum and the other things, there are a lot of other tech trends that are just going to make this landscape even more complicated to navigate.
Yeah, and one complexity for companies as they pick their boards of directors is a lot of people check the box in terms of, I've got cyber experience. I know how to think about cyber risk, but whether they actually do or not is a completely different thing. And what you're looking for is the person who understands business risk and cyber risk.
This is a little bit just like this morning on the lived experience of some of the people you're hiring. All right, I'm going to go to sort of our wrap up. There were some more great questions from the audience, but I wanted to give the panel members a chance to sort of leave you with one key takeaway that you want everyone to take back to their organizations as they navigate this evolving cyber threat landscape. So Dave, over to you first.
Throughout my career, what I've found to be the most important isn't really specific to cyber itself, but it's having a great leadership team. I cannot do all of it myself. I can't be the one that's out there advocating for security. And it doesn't really matter what area of the business that you're in. Having that great leadership team as a leader is what lifts the entire organization. That you have your succession planning in place, that you have people that you could delegate to when you go, be on a panel at a conference or whatever it might be. But to me, a lot of the things that are very important in leadership are just the same with cyber. Cyber doesn't make it any different.
Thank you. Georgianna?
I would say take the grf.org back, go look it up, the Global Resilience Federation and the Operational Resilience Framework. It shows you how to integrate those cyber processes into the business processes so that you ensure that you have the operational resilience required to continue to an integrated state.
Thank you. Niloo?
Whether this is cyber or anything else you're doing in an organization, after action reviews and near miss exercises will always make you better and make the organization better.
And Leslie?
I think these are all great answers. I think I would say if you are briefing your board, you give it to them straight. Don't hide anything.
Yep.
Accuracy and transparency.
Bad news doesn't get better
The
with
problem
age.
is we can sniff it out. I mean, that's the problem.
Well, yes and no, because the board you're briefing may not have the
That's true.
necessary expertise to sniff it out, but it's not going to get any better. And if you got a solid board, they want to hear the bad news. Because oftentimes on a board, you have people who have all different kinds of expertise and experience, and they will look at your problem differently than you will. And they may come up with questions that you hadn't thought of, or possible solutions, or they may have connections to resources that you don't have. And they can really be a resource for you if you treat them like that.
And I think my thought there is the collective responsibility and the orchestration you need across this broader and expanding ecosystem all the way out to your third, fourth, and fifth party partners and the partnerships. So I will say take advantage of your events the rest of today, and those of you who will be at the awards ceremony tonight, build your professional network. Thank you to the Cyber Guild and the UWIC team for giving us that opportunity, but that's really, you have a golden opportunity tonight. There's an amazing set of resources in this room and at the event tonight to grow that partnership ecosystem. So with that, I think we are at time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.